Hello everyone, this is the UNICE team from Laval University. Today we will discuss the lessons that can be learned from the COVID-19 crisis for the climate crisis. Let's move on to our first interactive question. True or false? Has climate change contributed to the emergence of COVID-19? It appears that climate change has indirectly contributed to the emergence of COVID-19 virus, also known as SARS-CoV-2. Zoonoses such as COVID are diseases whose agents naturally transmit themselves from animals to humans. Several factors are likely to promote the emergence of pathogens. Activities that require close contact with animals, such as intensive animal husbandry and wildlife trade, as well as environmental pressures, such as climate change and land use change, increase the risk of these diseases emerging. It is reasonable to think, in the case of COVID-19, that deforestation has caused the fragmentation of the natural bat habitats, the species suspected of being the origin of the virus. Ecosystem destruction increases both the risk of direct contact with bat excretions and indirect contact with intermediate hosts. In 1976, a similar scenario was observed when the Ebola virus first appeared in West Africa. Recent studies have identified bats as a reservoir for this virus, and monkeys as intermediate hosts. Let's move on to our second interactive question. Do you think that climate change has more differences than similarities to the COVID-19 crisis? Well, yes. COVID's issues have many more similarities with climate change than differences than one might think at first glance. In both cases, these crises are global and their consequences are irreversible. They also affect vulnerable communities to a greater extent and exacerbate social and spatial inequalities at the same time. Just like me, you probably discovered these famous curves last year. During the pandemic, most governments attempted to reduce the number of people infected in order to remain below the capacity of their system. By implementing preventative measures, and despite the fact that the number of people infected is the same in both scenarios, in the end, the number of people who died is lower in the case where preventative measures were implemented. While many countries in the world have managed to flatten this curve, a greater danger to humanity is looming in the horizon: climate change. Indeed, since the 1980s, there has been a drastic and worrying increase in the Earth's temperature. Let us now draw a parallel with the famous curves we discovered during the pandemic. In the case of climate change, the bar below which it would be important to stay represents the natural resources available on Earth. In particular, thanks to sustainable development, the available natural resources are used less quickly, thereby avoiding the death of many human beings and animals. Despite many similarities between climate change and the pandemic, we might wonder why the climate crisis is not as much a mobilizing event as the COVID-19 crisis. One of the reasons for this is that they are both low probability and high impact issues. Faced with this, the human brain underestimates the impacts, and these problems therefore get little attention from the public and world powers. One should also note that the COVID crisis was sudden and brutal, which provoked fear in people and provoked the action of political powers. Conversely, the effects of global warming are projected further in the future. But as leaders in the fight against climate change, such as Greta Thunberg, often remind us, it is high time to act. Despite this, political decisions are slow to come, The European Parliament declared a climate emergency in 2019. It was also only in December 2020 that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for the world to declare a climate emergency and called for a green recovery from the pandemic. Let's move on to our next interactive question. Can we say that COVID has a positive impact on the climate? From a short-term perspective, the answer to this question is quite intuitive. In fact, the lockdown has led to a considerable reduction in air pollution as a result of the reduction in industrial activities and air traffic. There was a marked decrease in nitrogen dioxide concentrations in Europe, with here a comparison between the average nitrogen dioxide concentrations from March to April 2020 compared to the average concentrations from March to April 2019. The same trends were observed in February 2020 during the lockdown in China. Should we be pleased with the temporary decrease in greenhouse gas emissions? Not so sure, since greenhouse gas emissions rebounded rapidly after the crisis. Fighting climate change thus requires structural and permanent changes in our societies to be sustainable in the long term. To learn more about the impact of air pollution on human health, I invite you to answer the next interactive question. True or false? The onset of COVID has indirectly led to a decline in premature death in some countries. According to the World Health Organization, air pollution causes more than 7 million deaths per year worldwide and is the leading threat to human health in relation to the environment. American and Italian researchers have recently investigated the impact of the reduced air pollution observed during lockdown on the number of premature deaths caused by cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. The two graphs you see here show the number of deaths averted over time. In China, where air pollution decreased by nearly 30%, it is estimated that the death of 24,200 people would have been prevented, while the virus has caused about 3,300 victims over the same period. In Europe, where air pollution has decreased by only 17%, the virus has been more deadly, and it is estimated that only 2,190 premature deaths has been prevented. Considering that air pollution is 3 times lower in Europe than in China, this may explain these results. As we have presented in this video, the COVID crisis has many similarities to climate change. From these similarities, we can learn to better prepare for the climate crisis. We can learn 5 major lessons from the pandemic. First, both climate change and the COVID crisis led to irreversible change. A second lesson is the realization that prevention involves fewer costs than healing, whether economically speaking or in terms of lives preserved. Preventative measures and immediate actions reduce the magnitude of the consequences. For the third lesson, we have observed that the COVID crisis has affected poor countries more strongly. They have fewer resources available to implement effective measures to address the crisis. In this context, international solidarity is required, which is our fourth lesson. The last lesson, but not the least, advice from experts is crucial, and their recommendations are the best weapons we have to prevent and combat the crisis. Fake news and misinformation in general hinder problem solving. As Einstein said, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. What opportunities are they? In your opinion, what actions should we take and what measures should we take to make certain changes permanent in our societies? If you liked this video, do not hesitate to leave us a little blue thumb, and we invite you to leave us a comment. This video was produced by Laval University for UniC, the International Student Climate Network. Don't hesitate to subscribe to our Facebook page.